Hi, Nicole. How are you this evening?
Hello, Zoe. I brought my wine. I'm sorry, but it is late.
Me too. Yes.
And so there's something about lockdown that has led me to have my evening wine, usually with somebody remotely like this, to have a little bit of company and a catch up. So yes, it's lovely. Thank you for having me on the show.
Thanks so much for agreeing. And, it is Privacy Awareness Week. Have I got the title correct?
Yes, happy Paul. Happy
Yes.
Paul.
Happy Paul. So I thought, okay, who better to get on this SmartComm SmartCommPod catch up, and talk to you about privacy. So first of all, tell us who you are and what you do and where you're based.
Okay, so hi everybody. I am Nicole Stephensen. I am a privacy consultant and I'm based in Ipswich, Queensland. And I have been in the privacy industry for 20-ish years now, which is actually a really huge milestone. And I have to say that this time in history is something I've never seen before in my career. So privacy is actually, it's really hotting up. So while no one likes a pandemic, I do have to say that it has brought privacy and the privacy profession to the fore in recent weeks, which is quite wonderful and also timely, given that we're celebrating Privacy Awareness Week.
So what types of things do you normally work with other organizations on specifically?
Okay, so my career's been pretty varied. It started in that privacy regulatory space and in the public service space. So, dealing with how government departments handle personal information, whether from an embedded perspective or from the perspective of a regulator that might be investigating complaints about that. Aw, your cat's here. Fantastic. Then outside of that, I've had a great career in the consulting space, which, for a while was focused mainly on the public sector. I mean, obviously, because that's a key area of expertise for me, but has now really evolved into the small business and SME space, and also wonderfully into the local government and smart city space. And I think that that's really where my niche is, because the privacy issues are so exciting and interesting in the context of, say, Internet of Things technologies and how they're driving our cities forward in terms of decision making and the various data-driven arguments that you hear all the time. These things are really interesting for me, and that's the space I'm enjoying being in at the moment.
Yeah, I was just looking up your episode that we did, and we were the Smart City podcast back then, episode 69, and we're talking about the importance of privacy protections in the smart city.
Yeah.
That was really, I remember the episode quite well. It was a really interesting kind of episode where we were talking about, that open data doesn't mean lack of privacy. Actually, we need to be thinking privacy first when we are planning and designing. It's not this kind of add-on thing that you do later on. And we've been hanging out online ever since, which has been great. And we now have some common friends like Debbie Reynolds, who we were just talking about, who has been on one of these as well. And so I just really enjoy you weighing in. And, I turn up at conferences and I'm pleasantly surprised that you were there on a panel to actually weigh in on this topic. So has it become more important, or was it always important? It's just now come to, I guess, the foreground.
Yeah, so privacy has been on the radar internationally in a big way since about 1980. So the OECD back then introduced these fair information practices that related to the transborder flows of personal information. And this is, that's to do with globalization. That's to do with how people are moving between countries and the need to ensure that as their data is moving with them, that it's managed in a secure and reasonable way, right? And within the expectations of those people. those things, those principles and those ideas haven't really changed all that much. But what has changed is the way that we operate as a society. So we're now in this, we've gone beyond globalization and we've moved to digitization, and we have a completely different economy. And even the way that we communicate is different. I think about when I started in privacy 20 years ago, fax was about the most exciting thing that happened digitally with personal information or any information, right? You know, the biggest risk was, we've put the wrong number in, and maybe the fax that was meant to be sent to the hospital ends up at the 7-Eleven down the street, right? So now, though, we're in an environment where information is traveling at lightning speed. It's being housed nowhere, right? It's housed in the cloud, and the idea that there isn't a place for personal information, there isn't a filing cabinet or a compactus, is really a headspin for a number of people. And you know, so from a privacy perspective, I feel myself having been drawn on this journey from the very basics, almost like we were writing on stone tablets, to something really interesting and really fast paced and really essential for ensuring balance. So we're not just in an environment now where we can take for granted that somebody has been thinking about privacy. We can't take for granted that somebody's been thinking about how information is secured either. So we have this almost this wonderful new or invigorated field where we have privacy professionals and information security professionals working hand in hand to make sure that all of this data, much of which is about you and me, is being managed properly within the digital economy. I think it's fabulous. As you can see, I really love my career.
Yeah, and I found it a really fascinating place. And the longer I've spent in the smart community space, the increase I have felt in my passion for data and privacy in particular. And because as citizens in a smart community, the only way it is a smart community is if me as a citizen in that community feels informed and empowered. And the only way we do that is if we know what our data, know what our data is doing. We know what our rights are. We know what's happening. We trust that things are happening in the correct way, all those type of things. Because if we don't have that trust, then we don't feel empowered. We feel like we can't make a difference. And I think that's really a key area of privacy and in relation to smart cities and smart communities.
Absolutely, Zoe.
I was recently on a podcast recently on a podcast. Yeah, it was yesterday. My days are just kind of molding into.
I know, you know what? That's something about this COVID-19 life at the moment. I think all the days for all of us are kind of running into each other. So don't feel bad. I have the same experience.
I was on a podcast yesterday, and I was talking to, and one of the questions, so they got questions from the audience to ask me, and one of them was around the power shift between, say, big tech companies. Well, it was about big tech companies in particular, and that power shift that we're seeing, and how does that actually fit into the smart community space. And I did start talking about, privacy and being informed. And then, they were like, well, tell us exactly what we need to do. And I was like, okay, well, these are some of the things that I do to, know what data exchange is happening and all that type of stuff. But I'm keen, and I thought about you the whole time when I was talking. So I'm keen to hear what your thoughts are around that kind of data. We have these big data machines that are doing all this stuff with our data. And so what are some of the things that you do or you talk about in relation to, that potentially perceived like black box that we're feeding our data into?
Oh, yeah. So there are companies around the world. Where did you go?
My cat was scratching at the door. Okay,
back.
I'm back.
All right. So there are companies around the world that their business model is that they gather data from other data companies and they form pictures of you and me. It's almost like you've heard the term digital twin when we think about cities, right? You know, sort of digitally mapping what a city looks like. Well, there are digital twins for people too. And there are companies that their entire job is to build a profile of you and me, a digital profile. It may not be named Zoe's profile or Nicole's profile, but it might as well be, because that profile allows us to be marketed to. It allows someone to know what our political preferences are so that they can target their advertising campaigns accordingly. And I find this sort of data machine really interesting, really frightening. Actually, so I have somebody within my friendship sphere who recently submitted their DNA to one of the sort of DNA ancestry testing companies in the States, and I nearly fell off my chair because that same company has an agreement with a big pharma company. I think for just a moment about what this means from a privacy perspective, right? So the friend of mine is sending their DNA to a company to find out, what her ancestry is, find out, what bits of her are Scottish and what bits of her are French, and that sort of thing. But that same DNA can be used to determine what potential genetic issues that she may have, what flaws there may be in her genetic code that might lead to disease, or some other misfortune for her. If Big Pharma gets their hands on that information, then likely the insurers are going to get their hands on that information, and then it's sort of like the river just flows on and on and on. And when we're at that sort of point of sale, these are not things that we're thinking about as consumers. We're not thinking about where the river flows. So if I go back to your original question about, what are the kinds of things I think about and talk about, I talk about where the river flows. And I have a colleague who talks about something called digital exhaust. And in some of my LinkedIn posts, you might have seen that. And it's this whole idea that as individuals, we leave everywhere we go, in every transaction, whether it's a transaction in person at a point of sale, like at a bank or a gas station, or if it's a transaction online at a point of sale, online shopping or buying a game, downloading an app, whatever it is, we leave a little trail behind us. It's sort of like this little bit of shiny pixie dust that is eventually collected by this black box that you talked about, or this data machine, to help to form a view of who we are.
And like from an individual perspective, and what I talk about a lot is just the awareness. So I think we have blindly for many years, or it's just kind of, the river flowing, right? We just kind of like, maybe we give that, okay, that's gone in, okay, we don't think about that anymore. But now it's what I feel is like we are as a community lacking the awareness of what's happening. And I think a lot of people talk about, well, I don't do anything wrong, so why should I worry about where my data is? And I find that quite dangerous thoughts, because right now in the current rules that we have, well, actually it's a very strange time to even be talking about this, because before you might not have done anything wrong, but actually if you did what you did a month ago, that actually would be wrong in the eyes of the law, for example. But also just from a data and awareness perspective, the river, you don't know where it's going to flow downstream.
So there's two things, right? The first is that it's unproductive and unhelpful to attach the concept of personal privacy to criminality, right? The idea that if I haven't done anything wrong, I have nothing to hide. That's about criminality. That's not about privacy. Privacy is a human right. And privacy as a human right and as a civil liberty has been enshrined in laws all around the world so that we understand what should happen to personal information in particular contexts, right? So that in a reasonable and consistent and replicable way, our governments and businesses understand what they need to do with our personal information.
Mm.
That is so far removed from, if I do something wrong, I may be under surveillance, or if I do something wrong, then I may be giving away my privacy rights because the law doesn't allow that thing. Those are two completely separate concepts.
Mm.
Equally there, and my second point is that there's often talk in society about how privacy doesn't apply anymore, or privacy is dead because of the way that we've all decided to enter into the digital economy and transact online and engage in social media in our private lives. Now, I can tell you what I choose to do in my private life is completely separate from what I'm obliged to do in my relationship with my government. So if I'm obliged to provide certain information in my relationship with my government in order to receive a service or a benefit, the government has to be able to provide a reciprocal level of comfort for me in terms of what's going to happen to my personal information in that context, in terms of receiving the service or benefit, and down the river. I want to know that if I give my information to receive a service or a benefit, that it's not going to be misused or used in a way that I don't reasonably expect down the river. Now, that's the bar that has been set for my government because we have privacy laws in place. What I choose to do in my private life is something completely different. Unfortunately, though, in our society, it's very hard to kind of come to grips with that paradox. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think like for me, you know, when we talk about that the I guess the power shift, because these big tech companies, now we've given all our data, and we continue to do that, and it's not government, right? They don't have to have the public good. They don't have to offer essential services. But what these tech companies have now been able to do is offer essentially essential services that if we opt out, we're actually opting out of modern society. And I think that's where the power shift has shifted, or that's where that change has happened. And that's where I see privacy really being challenged. And then in the future, it actually, we've already started addressing some of those things that are happening.
Do you know who I would love for you to talk to on one of your future podcasts? There's this fellow called Nathan Kinch. And I don't know if you've met Nathan, but there's a concept called data trust by design, amongst all the other many things that he talks about. He does talk about this power imbalance and how almost the lack of fairness in that power struggle, or that power imbalance, leads to the community suffering in terms of what happens to their personal information, and big business gaining. And that more work needs to be done in that space between in order to do the right thing and to generate the kind of world that we want to live in. So I commend to you and to the people who are listening to this podcast or this webcast, go and have a look at the work of Nathan. He's really quite an exceptional character, and I think he's got a lot to offer.
Cool. No, thank you. I always love to follow new people in this space because I find it so interesting. And I joined a webinar in the US, which, another silver lining of, this current COVID crisis that we're in, is that it's now normal to be able to just access webinars from around the world. I mean, they were always kind of available, but it wasn't kind of a normal thing that you would fit into your day. But now, that's kind of a normal thing. And Bianca Wiley was on that that webinar. So I found it really an interest, and obviously it's US based, so some of the things won't apply to Australia because we have healthcare and those type of things. So that was a big topic. where they were talking about, tracking and tracing COVID. But, they were talking more about, well, if you're going to invest in that, maybe you should just invest in healthcare. But yeah, so that it was really interesting, just continue to open my eyes around, this space, and that it is a complex thing, but it's also changing so rapidly as well. And then the regulation, and I'm keen to hear your thoughts, are, kind of not modernized enough to keep up with this change.
Yeah, so look, when it comes to what's happening now in terms of, I guess, regulation keeping pace with innovation, I've probably been banging on for a while about how regulation is behind. And yet, look, we have to be fair to our lawmakers and our decision makers in government, because to regulate properly, particularly around privacy, is a process that needs to be thoughtful and well reasoned. And it can't just be, all right, whoever gets the best idea out of the gate or the first idea out of the gate, they win and will do that thing. There needs to be a degree of discussion and investigation and research. And this is why, for example, we look at the Australian Law Reform Commission report years ago, Report 108, that resulted in changes to Australia's existing privacy law. That was a long process. That was a long process because there was a law at stake. So on the one hand, I see that regulation's not keeping up. But I don't think it's because regulators are doing a poor job. What I think is that innovation and technology is just moving at lightning speed, right? I can't even keep up with it. Yeah, and I, while I think that's exciting, I also find it a little bit frightening, because what we know works today in terms of governing personal information, it's not going to work next week. A classic example is the concept of consent, right? So if we want to go to the topic of, say, the COVID Safe app that's been released by the Australian government, right? There is a reliance on consent. Individuals need to opt in to have the app. Now, I think this is really positive. I am able to exercise my choice and control in relation to whether or not I will download and provide my data to the app. The problem is that the consent mechanism is a bit light on. And it's a bit light on because it's an app. And when people move through an app, they, you go to the app store, you look at the summary, you do a little click through, and at that moment, you want access to what you want access to. You get challenged to have a look at the privacy policy and to provide your agreement, and you do all of those things. But that's not really the way consent is meant to work. Consent is meant to work as part of a larger process. Consent needs to be voluntary, informed, current, and specific. Now, if we were in the old paper and pen days where people were reading through, a 12-page multi-part form, and they got to go to an information session, and before they signed on the dotted line, there was somebody sitting there with them and saying, I just want to remind you that these are the risks, and these are your rights, and these are our obligations. Are you okay with this? That's the kind of consent process that all of us are used to from a regulatory perspective. We're not used to what needs to be done now in terms of the pace of innovation, in terms of the development of apps or platforms. We need to keep up. And nothing has yet been devised that solves this problem in a meaningful way.
Yeah, really interesting. And we've had a few conversations about that exact thing in the past, and particularly when I was traveling on my Churchill fellowship as well, and just thinking about those things, and also after we've said yes to something, what does that actually mean? And how long have I said yes for? Is it
Can we
indefinite?
unsay the yes? At some point, can we unsay it?
Yeah. Can we
Yeah.
retract, or can we even understand? Like, for me, like we're in this space, right? And if we're, not being able to keep up or confused about certain things or whatever, then what hope is that for, a regular citizen that doesn't have time to, be reading all privacy policies and going, oh, okay, yep, that makes sense. Okay, I'm not okay with that, but I will say yes because I'll know, but whatever. And that's what I find really, or what I struggle with is, that we do say yes so quickly, but we don't actually understand what it means. And is it up to us as a regular citizen to understand that, or is there some kind of obligation that's being missed?
No, look, I would argue that the obligation is on the organization or the government to provide you with the right information at the right time to allow you to make an informed decision.
Mm-hmm.
So, look, I think in terms of best privacy practice, the onus should not be on the citizen. The onus should be on the government or the organization that's wanting to have their data to make the privacy, the privacy playing field clear.
Really interesting. So for Privacy Awareness Week, what are some of the things that you've been doing is it a celebration, or is it like awareness? Is it what do we do during this week?
So, look, from my perspective, I mean, this is Privacy Awareness Week is the week where the privacy professionals get to sing to their own choir, right? Because it's our time to allow the great work that's happening in our profession to shine. It's also our time to be able to really push messages out there to the community and to government and to industry and to other sectors about why privacy matters so much in the context of our decision making. If we could have Privacy Awareness Day every day, that would be super from my perspective, right? But it's one of those topics that people don't often think about until something has gone wrong, until somehow their trust has been breached or their personal information has ended up being sold to someone that they didn't understand was part of the deal when they signed up for an app or a platform. So really, I think it's about education, and it's about building that awareness within the community, but also within our government and our business sectors around what's the right thing to do and what expectations we should all have of each other.
Yeah, I think that's really important to not just make it about education of everyday citizen, but actually it's about government, it's about business, it's about both sides of that exchange of data as well. And what I talked about when I was asked, going back to that other question, was that awareness. So making, when we are, and I'm not suggesting, because it's not reasonable, which is again another struggle I have, to read every single privacy policy that we're signing up for, but also just having a think about that before we click on, the next thing or the next thing or the game or the whatever. But actually, does this app really need my mobile phone number? Is that an optional extra? So opt out of those things. So we don't have to opt in to absolutely everything. And that was kind of my message. So keen to hear your thoughts on that.
Okay, so when I deliver privacy training, I always give this example, and I think it's really relevant here. There was a time when I was meeting up with a business associate for dinner after a privacy conference. And I decided to book us into this really sort of fancy, sort of, one of those kind of boutique-y Asian fusion restaurants that everyone wants to go to. And to find the reservations section was a challenge online. But eventually I got there and I found out that no, I couldn't actually call to make a reservation. I needed to book online. Okay, no trouble. So I go to book online, but the booking request form was asking for information that was so beyond what was necessary to book a table for two for dinner, right? You would expect maybe what's your mobile phone number or what's your email address, to confirm.
Yep.
And you would expect what time are you coming in and how many people?
Yeah. And your name.
Oh, maybe, or your
Maybe your name, or like a
right? But the booking form was asking things like, what's your gender and when's your birthday? And the only thing I could think was, okay, so maybe on my birthday, they want to send me a pink or a blue card that has, a happy birthday coupon for $100 in it. But even so, that wasn't acceptable to me. And the only way to make the booking online was to fill out all of the information fields. So we obviously didn't go to that restaurant for dinner. But it was a really important point. It illustrates a really important point, which is that I have an obligation as a consumer to say, oh, you know what? That's not cool with me. That doesn't make sense why I would need to provide all those extra details just to access this one thing. Equally, though, there's an obligation on our businesses, and the obligation is set out in law that we should only collect what we need to fulfill our business purpose. So in this case, the restaurant in question obviously hadn't had a privacy tutorial.
And I guess lost business, but also what you chose to opt out of that. But what I find is a lot of these services that we are required to provide all this information for isn't necessarily something that we can just opt out of because of modern day life.
Yeah.
That's where I see the real, and for me, it's actually an exciting challenge, and for you it would be as well. It's like this challenge that we really need to solve, particularly when we are talking about, in the future, smart cities and communities, or, things that are happening right now. Because for me, and I know we've had this conversation, it offers such a great opportunity and, transformational change and, making things more efficient, more effective, more accessible, more livable and sustainable. But if it's not done with the citizen and privacy front of mind, both from a regulatory perspective, but then where regulation isn't keeping up from a, I guess, ethical or moral perspective, then we can't get there, which is such a shame if we can't marry those two things together, I guess, or and I think people sometimes see smart cities as this surveillance data machine, but actually for me, it's not that at all. It's actually, and that's why I use the word smart community, is it's actually with the community front of mind. And we do things not to collect information about the community. We do things to collect information that is useful to the community.
Yeah. And, I think that's an awesome kind of call to action, right? Because I know we need to wrap up. That is the idea that we need to have equity in that data exchange between the community and whomever is serving the community, whether it's government or business or a not-for-profit, whatever, right? That we need to lobby for a more equitable data exchange, where as a member of the community, I understand why my data is necessary and I understand what I'm getting from that exchange, that I trust that. And that the organization that's taking that information is behaving in a manner that I understand is in accordance with privacy rules. Yeah.
It's been so great to chat with you, Nicole.
Yeah, I know, right? It's so
Thank
good.
you so much. I mean, we could talk for a long time, I think, and we will have we will catch up again very soon, and hopefully in person, but if not, online is suiting me just fine at the moment. And yeah, I'm so glad we got to share a drink to celebrate.
That's right.
And yeah, I look forward to continuing to follow you on LinkedIn. I know you've been doing some awesome stuff, putting out some awesome videos recently, which I'm excited to see.
Yeah, this week. So for Privacy Awareness Week, my company's released 3 videos that are targeting small businesses and your boutique platforms and your startups. because these are the guys that often fall through the cracks in terms of getting privacy right. And I thought, well, no better time than the present to provide a little bit of education and a little bit of support to that sector.
Absolutely. And we'll link to those when I put this out on YouTube, as well as on when I put it on LinkedIn as a post as well. So I'll link to those because, I've just been watching them and they are very, very good and very useful. And I think we now more than ever, we need to think about those people that are falling through the cracks, from all aspects of, this space. So thanks so much for doing that.
Thank you so much, Zoe.
It's been so great to chat with you. We'll talk soon, and have a great night. We'll talk soon.
Thank you. I will.
Bye. See ya. Bye.